You're very welcome back to our live stream. Very, very close to the Dáil. It's the scene of a lot of action tonight with this absolutely extraordinary vote on the EU Asylum and Migration Pact. Outside here, we have a lot of people have turned up, obviously clearly concerned on both sides of the argument that is now being discussed in the Dáil chamber. Now, my next guest is somebody of extraordinary interest to me because she's Senior Counsel Una McGurk, knows her onions. She stood up very, very early stages of COVID-19 and she called it out for what she saw it was and paid the price. As we were talking to Ivor Cummins just a moment ago about what happened in those days, about the cancel culture and the so-called conspiracy theories that have most of which turn out now to be true, which is why there's silence now on the other side. And that's breaking out throughout the world, and it's all interconnected with what's going on, as I discussed with Ivor, with this Asylum Pact. And the flooding, the breakdown of homogeneous society. It's all part of a multi-level thing that's going on globally. But let's get down to brass tacks. I'm going to ask Una about events today because you were in the High Court again today, Una. You were in the High Court last week. You're clearly exercised about this Asylum Pact. You did a remarkable job around the constitutional referendum. You did a TikTok. It hit 250,000. It just kept going and going and going because you gave a very cogent, clearly explained dialogue or monologue on what was going on. And you've done the same thing with the EU Asylum Pact, but a lot of people won't have heard that, and they're now tuning in. A lot of people don't realise what's going on in the Dáil. They're just tuning in now and saying, "What the hell is going on?" So maybe we could just start there. What are your concerns about this proposed opt-in?
Before I get to that, Eddie, if I may, because I just want to remind some of your viewers and subscribers and you also that I've been doing a number and a series of YouTube videos on this very issue and in which I have called upon people to send various letters and template letters to their TDs and indeed their senators. And I just want to say how grateful I am to all of those people who watched and shared my videos because again, I've had great numbers and it's been fantastic, and people have taken the time and the trouble to send letters to their TDs and senators, and I've been overwhelmed by the response and by the positive response, and I really just want to acknowledge that. I'm so grateful. Now, time will tell as to the extent of the success of that or otherwise. But even if it's not successful, I just think the groundswell of support and opinion and the community effort is in itself fantastic. And I sincerely hope that people have been and become informed as a result of the videos, because I think it's important that they know what's going on. So I just wanted to say that at the outset.
That's the pressure side on the politicians to try and change their position. I mean, to defy party whips, really, which is what would be required ultimately.
Which is so difficult, of course, because we know the consequences of that really are expulsion from the party. So it's a very difficult system for many of them to be in. But, and then we have to consider, is that an ideal system for us all moving forward? And I think there are people out there who are actually considering those types of issues moving forward, maybe with setting up new parties, etc. But that's a story for another day.
I know that law requires lawyers, right? So I get that completely.
Yes.
And there's nothing more dangerous than an amateur lawyer, right? Going into waters they shouldn't be going into. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But can you just, in the best way you can, just walk us through the kind of instruments that you were engaged in the High Court and what the strategy is and why it's such a complex area? This is the interconnection between the Constitution, the Crotty ruling, if that would come into it, and what the government are attempting to do. It seems to be extraordinary that we've opted out, that we voted on an opt-out in Lisbon 2, and just to summarise it, and here we are wanting to voluntarily opt in, and the Danes are saying, well, we're not doing that, but our crowd are saying, yes, we are, and they're coming up with a sustainable argument as far as they're concerned. So I'd like to look at it from both sides, if I could. Of course,
and there's many different elements to it, as you've just described, but as many people will be aware, last week I initiated proceedings in the High Court in my own name. And the parties I sued were the Minister for Justice, Ireland, the Attorney General, and the Clerk of the Dáil and the Clerk of the Senate. And, I sought a number of declaratory reliefs, the principal one being that I sought a permanent injunction, restraining the parties from, instigating or conducting a vote either in the Dáil or the Senate with regard to the EU Migration Pact until such time as there could be a judicial determination with regard to the issues contained therein and or a constitutional referendum of the people. So that was the essence of what I sought last week. Now, there was an aspect of the case which, there were some bizarre, mysterious circumstances which I don't really want to get into, but an aspect of the case mysteriously didn't get listed. And I think it probably wasn't properly, described what happened. And unfortunately on social media, there were some comments about it which were not accurate, which were not helpful. But not with...
You mean comments on social media that were inaccurate, right?
Are not helpful. But notwithstanding that, the case is still subsisted and is still subsisting today. So just to bring that out to plain English for the rest of us, right? So the case is still ongoing. It's before the courts. Yes. So the case is still before the courts. Okay. So on that basis, through my lawyers, and I might add that I have an excellent legal team, acting for me and representing me, even though I'm the plaintiff. I was a lawyer, but I'm not acting for myself, and I wouldn't act for myself in this case because the issues are so profound and so serious and so significant, and clearly would have and will have profound, are of profound public importance. So I just wouldn't do a case like this myself. So on the basis that the case was still subsisting and we knew that there was going to be a vote this evening, my legal team contacted all the parties yesterday evening to ask them to desist from having any vote in the Dáil on this issue until such time.
And all the parties now would be...
All the parties were notified.
Which
Minister for Justice, the Ireland and the Attorney General, the Clerk of the Dáil, which is all that's relevant for the vote this evening. And they were asked not to organise or participate or conduct a vote in the Dáil this evening on the EU Asylum and Migration Pact, and or notify the President of the EU Council of the outcome of that vote, unless and until there is a judicial determination and or constitutional referendum.
Can I just pause you there?
So that, in other words, until the proceedings that I have instituted are determined by a court.
Yeah, but you just slipped past something there. You probably, because just so the audience can grab it, right? So that if a vote goes through in the House, that then has to be notified to the President. I think you said the President of the EU.
Yes, there is a process that once the vote takes place, then what happens under Article 3 of Protocol 21, which is the protocol they're opting into, is that the President of the EU Council has to be then notified of it. So we also asked that process would not take place. But of course, as I'm sitting here talking to you, Eddie, I don't know if any of that will happen or will take, in other words, whether or not they will accede to the request of my lawyers, because unfortunately another matter took place today in the High Court, which may have an impact on that. Somebody else took proceedings in the High Court today, and in fact, they had already instituted proceedings which were listed for hearing on the 15th of July.
Oh, yes, I know the case. Yeah.
The lady in question was Michelle Keenan. I think she did a number of TikTok videos on it. And then, for reasons which are unknown, she decided to institute fresh proceedings yesterday and got the matter listed before the High Court today. And she ran the case herself as a lay litigant. And unfortunately, she didn't succeed. And the case was dismissed with costs. Now, obviously, even though her case was very different to mine in many respects, there are some similarities, even though I would say that my case was much stronger, was more robust, and we would have been dealing with much more intricate arguments. Now, the situation is that obviously we're going to have to get advices from senior counsel to see what effects or ramifications, of any, this case will have on our case today. And so I can't tell you the outcome of that yet, because that's something that's ongoing, and we're going to have to engage in that process because Michelle rushed to do her case today in High Court.
But so long as your case is before it's within the curtilage of the Irish judicial system in the High Court as we speak.
Yes.
It cannot move out of there until and unless the government notify, let's say there's a yes vote, the government, because the whips have driven it, the government have to then notify the President of the EU Parliament. There's a gap there.
But the issues in my case are, in a sense, different. There are the issues contained in the case, for example, as set out in the plenary summons, which is how you instigate proceedings. So at the moment, that is before the court and will take its place and will have to be processed in the normal way. But then what my legal team did yesterday was to simply notify the parties in a separate sort of action, so to speak. It's not a legal action. It was simply a notification by email and by hand-delivered letters that we asked the parties to desist from engaging in a vote on the basis that my case was pending before the court and that it would be inappropriate for them to proceed with the vote whilst the issues relating to the vote had not yet been determined by the High Court. But you see, another litigant, a lay litigant, has now entered the fray, so to speak, and has taken an action which came before the High Court today, which we were unaware of and not expecting, which relates to some of those issues, and that may have an impact on our case.
And what's your sense of when the courts will come around to dealing, therefore, with your case?
I don't know, because at the moment in time, because of the action that was taken by Michelle Keane today and the consequences of that action, where she lost her action, and some of the issues that were part of her case would also be similar to my case. Not all of them, but some of them. So this may have an impact on my case, and therefore, at this moment in time, before we do anything, we're going to have to get further advices from senior counsel.
Okay, so that's your team advising you.
Yes,
but will the justice in concerned issue? Is there any process by which the High Court itself will communicate out, or is it?
No.
Or it's a question of going in.
Question of going in, because each case is dealt with on its merits and it's separate. I mean, she was a separate litigant to me, obviously, just like every litigant. So it's but obviously, if issues are similar to some extent, that will could affect potentially an aspect of another case.
Can I ask you one last question, Una? And thanks for that. I mean, you explained that very, very clearly. If the vote goes through and if the EU Parliament President is notified, and let's say all of that happens, and then what I find, it just wrecks my head, that we're then going to put legislation in place to support our opt-in after we've opted in. I mean, I think it's November we intend to come up with how we're going to do all this as a country. It seems to me, I just cannot understand how the government are racing through to do something that they don't need to race through to do. Exactly. And then the actual mechanisms by which all this will happen will be decided after the event.
Yeah, to a certain extent, there's essentially five legislative measures contained in this pact. And what's very bizarre about it, first of all, is the fact that unlike what happened in the European Parliament, where each of the measures were voted upon separately, here the government are insisting that the Seanad, who have already voted, and the Dáil, who may or may not be voting tonight, will deal with this package as a whole, instead of dealing with each of the measures separately, which would be preferable. And so it's very anti-democratic in that sense. But what's interesting about EU law, and I'll just say this very briefly, sometimes a legislative measure can be in the form of a regulation or a directive. So because you have a package of 5 measures, so to speak, most are regulations which will be directly applicable, but some of them are directives, which means they have to be transposed into Irish law. Yes. So I think that's what you mean when you say that the Irish government, or the Minister for Justice, I think, has said that legislation will be instigated. But what is very significant about the vote, if it takes place tonight, and if the Dáil votes to opt into this measure, and the President of the European Council is notified thereafter, subject to, as part of Article 3 of the protocol, that's it. We can never, ever opt out. We've opted in forever. And that means then that a process known as the Necessitated Obligations Clause of our Constitution kicks in, which means that once something becomes part of community law or EU law, it can never, ever be challenged by...
within the Irish courts.
Exactly,
okay.
By our Constitution. And so that is a concern.
Okay.
Let's just say that is a concern.
Okay, well, that puts it all on the line. Well,
yes,
thanks so much. I wish we had a better ending to that conversation.
Yeah, no,
but you've explained very well. Congratulations on everything you've done. Congratulations on everything on behalf of the Irish people.
Oh, you're very
kind. Thank you so much.
Not at all. It's my pleasure.
Thank you, Una.
Thank you very much, Eddie.